All right. Welcome back to the Week 12 recap edition of the NFL season. I'm your host, Lewis. Next to me is my beautiful co-host, Laraib, as we are going to break down and recap the games from this NFL Sunday and all the big news and headlines from this week and weeks to come. Obviously, we did not post a predictions episode for last week. It was Thanksgiving time. We both had a lot on our plate. Friday was Brown Christmas for all of our dedicated viewers who know Laraib very well. Very busy for the both of us. So did not get our predictions. Our locks and upsets. Our upsets both fell through. I had the Chargers, and they fell short due to a very genius man named Anthony Lynn, who is now on the hottest of seats for the remaining coaches. And what was your upset, Laraib? Tampa?
The Buccaneers. Almost Tom Brady with a comeback, but fell short. But for the locks, you came through on yours with the Saints, and then for my lock, we'll find out tomorrow with the Steelers. But I don't think it will be too big of an issue. But speaking of Ravens-Steelers, let's talk about that. What's going on with the COVID situation, Lewis?
Yeah, so obviously this game was supposed to be the night game for Thanksgiving. And then big news, Lamar Jackson tests positive for coronavirus. And a lot of guys, it started with the running back rooms. Mark Ingram and J.K. Dobbins both came down with coronavirus. And Lamar Jackson was in the running back room. That's how he got it, not in the quarterback room. But also Trace McSorley came down. Robert Griffin III did not test positive, so he will likely be the starter, or he will be the starter for the game tomorrow against the Steelers. But talking about the implications of this game for the NFL, I mean, it's getting really worrisome for me. Just how the outlook of this season has gone. We've been very lucky. We talked about it in our podcast, what we're thankful for. And I said, I'm thankful that every game that has been scheduled has been played and that we will not need a week 18 or an 8th playoff spot in these upcoming playoffs. I feel like 18, you're going to have half the league in the playoffs. So maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's not. I don't think so. But just what we need to take away from this situation is, do we need to do something drastic? Do we need to have a shutdown of the season? Laraib, I want your input on this just shortly, but I want to see what you think about this. But personally, I think something – because this is not just happening in Baltimore. I know they are the linchpins, but we saw earlier in the season with point, Laraib, where, it's getting cold across the country. All these teams are moving from outdoor facilities to the indoor facilities, unless you're the Bengals and don't have an indoor practice facility. And it's becoming such a contentious thing where, guys are going to be forced to stay next to each other, and you got to follow the rules. You got to wear your masks, but it's just, you've already gone through 3 months of the season, and it's like, all right, we're probably not making the playoffs, and teams can get a little complacent, not wear their masks, i.e. the Broncos, who are going to hit on in a situation, and then a whole position group gets hit. Now, thankfully for the Broncos, they got it all under wraps, just the quarterbacks, but in terms of, this could happen to an entire team with contact tracing and all of this. So in my opinion, we need to just find a quick, swift way to get it all done. And I've heard rumors and rumblings of a bubble that could potentially happen. I'm a proponent of a bubble because of this part of the season. I would prefer if we could get to the playoffs first. And once we're at the playoffs, then we just have a playoff bubble, because the worst thing that can happen is if it's a playoff game and Russell Wilson or Patrick Mahomes or a big star gets COVID. And that it's just, you can't control that. They're just going to miss that game, and that team's probably going to lose. So, Laraib, I want to hear what you think about it.
Well, first thing, just to start off with, it shows how quickly things can change during the season, right? We see a couple games get postponed and moved on to a week later. But now we're talking about, outbreaks for the Ravens, outbreaks for the Broncos, a game pushed back almost a whole week. So it just shows you how fast things can go around and, just switch around for the whole NFL. And, we talked about it early on in the season, and we saw what happened to the Raiders and the Saints and the Seahawks to get the $100,000 fine, and they, lose out on some picks and stuff like that. But the NFL really needs to put down the foot once again, especially on these teams. I think the Ravens should have forfeited this game, to be honest. The NFL looks like a laughing stock right now. You push back the game from Thursday to Sunday to Monday to Tuesday to Wednesday. I mean, that is just terrible. I mean, you got to cancel the game at some point. I know Lamar Jackson and Steelers, primetime divisional game, two of the best teams in the NFL right now. But, the the NFL just looked terrible with this decision. And, speaking of bubble, I don't think, the bubble idea was brought up to start the season, and it really didn't, wasn't too viable. And right now, I still don't think it's too viable because, we're going into week 13, still a couple of weeks left. And then, the playoffs, I think of playoffs that could be and probably should be in a bubble. Like you were saying, you can have the AFC teams, all 7 of them in one location, and the NFC team somewhere else. You don't have to have all 14 teams at the same spot. No, but definitely a bubble. I believe it is most likely on the way for the playoffs just because, someone like you're saying just goes down with COVID and it just ruins the teams, Super Bowl chances this season. But no, NFL handled this terribly. I believe, they're definitely going to have to work on something going forward. People talking about shutting the season down for a couple of weeks, let everyone get healthy again and maybe start a bubble like that. But definitely something is on the way for the NFL.
Well, the thing about forfeiting games, Laraib, and I do think that, there needs to be that – it needs to get to a point where we just can't move a game back anymore. But think about for the Steelers, right? At first it was like, all right, our Thanksgiving, we're having this big primetime game. They've already had their bye super early because of the whole situation, which, the Titans game was postponed and they had to have their bye in week 3. So now you have a situation where we're going to have a Thanksgiving game, 10 days rest going into the stretch of the season. But instead now it's, don't know when you're playing, you're game planning, you're not. And then if you forfeit the game, all that game plan, all that time is lost. But also, you don't get paid. You don't get paid for forfeiting unless the Ravens are going to pay for your game checks. I mean, the NFL's, probably the stingiest league with its money. It's a really tough situation. The Steelers, good for them. They're 10-0. They're, the Warriors of this season because of how much they've had to deal with, losing their bye, losing a primetime Thanksgiving game, and that's huge for players. They want to play in the bright spotlights. I don't want to hear some basic NFL fan on Twitter say again, like, oh, you should be happy you could spend time with your family. Shut the hell up. They spend time with their family anyway. It's clearly their decision. They want to play in the bright lights. Everyone will be watching them. Everyone's going to be like, damn, Stephon Tuitt is a good defensive tackle. Only us two know who that is. I mean, I doubt anyone else in the states of Louisiana or Texas, 95% of people don't know who Stephon Tuitt is, but he gets 3 sacks on Lamar Jackson. You're like, dang. But that's just one example. But back to the bigger –
the Steelers are still getting the short end of the stick because, they play on Wednesday, right? And then their game is on Monday. Meanwhile, the Ravens, they get an extra day of rest, and they get to play on Tuesday. So, I mean, that's just another blunder.
Lamar Jackson to come back.
Yeah, and Lamar Jackson gets to play.
Right.
Which, I mean, it's not good.
Definitely been getting the short end of the stick the entire time. And, good thing for them. They're 10-0. They've really made advantage of the situation. So they play tomorrow, Wednesday afternoon game. We'll be watching, but it's going to be weird, obviously. So just look out. We hope that the rest of the season, no more outbreaks happen, but it's such just a contentious time in this country. Things seem like they're only getting worse at the moment. So just these players need to realize you only have a few more games left. Just wear your mask. And if you're a team where you're basically eliminated from the playoffs, don't be that team to ruin it for everyone. Don't be a Jets player who plays against the Seahawks and, you go into a game and you get a Seahawks sick and then their season's, in jeopardy and all of this happens.
Well, speaking of the Seahawks, there's only one team in the NFL who hasn't had a player test positive for coronavirus. That is the Seattle Seahawks.
Really? Wow.
So, maybe NFL, Roger Goodell, maybe some draft compensation, maybe.
Well, maybe they'll get the Saints pick from what we lost from, even the Saints. We had it was kind of BS in my opinion, but following the big win over the Buccaneers, you had the players celebrating in the locker room without masks, and you get the $500,000 fine plus a loss of a 7th-round draft pick in future years. I don't know what you do with that pick. I mean, what happened is the NFL just say like, and we're just gonna have one less pick this season. That's strange to me, but Maybe that guy just becomes a free agent. I don't know. But let's move on now, Laraib. We are going to hit on another thing about this COVID situation that has affected the league, but it's in a different spot. Sunday's game with the Denver Broncos, and it wasn't Drew Lock under center. It wasn't Brett Rippon. It wasn't Blake Bortles. It was Kendall Hinton. Laraib?
Yeah, if you were on Twitter during this past weekend and you searched up Broncos, you would definitely, it was trending on Twitter, why not the Broncos, right? And I'll tell you why it's not the Broncos, because it's just 4 players who are out. I know quarterback is the most important position on the field for the Broncos, but it's just 4 players. They're comparing it to why the Ravens game was pushed back, and that was, almost half of the team for the Ravens has coronavirus and are unable to play. But for the Broncos, I know you're upset that, you didn't get to play with your quarterbacks, any of them, and you have to bring in a practice squad guy. But it's only 4 people who had the coronavirus, so I don't think that game should have been pushed back. But, tough break for the Broncos, and especially, the blunder that they had sending the video to the NFL. Lewis, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, that was puzzling to me. So what the situation was Jeff Driscoll tested positive for COVID, and they needed to do contact tracing to see who else on this Broncos team was near or around Jeff Driscoll who could potentially become a coronavirus, positive or something like that. So there was an off-scheduled meeting in which the Denver Broncos quarterbacks were all together, including Jeff Driscoll, the day before he tested positive, with all of the quarterbacks in a room. They weren't wearing masks, and the Broncos sent that video to the league to review. Now, why they were filming the meeting is kind of strange to me. I don't understand the protocols. Maybe it's just kind of like the NFL is film everything so we can see what happens. Maybe that's a part of the contact tracing. I'm not sure. But in this situation, all of them were deemed close contacts and could not play for 48 hours. So Broncos fans are wondering, well, in 48 hours, why not push it to a Tuesday game? Well, we've already pushed back 2 games, but that's not even the point. The point is no positive tests came out for the Broncos on Sunday. And if they were, they would have moved the game back because you still have to do the contact tracing for future days. So you're in a situation where it's just this one position group. And we've seen this through the NFL. The Bills had a week where all their tight ends couldn't play in a game, but you didn't hear anything about that because it's tight end. But in this situation, it's quarterback. So it's going to be, you're basically it was the worst game I've seen all season. Taysom Hill against Kendall Hinton was probably the worst quarterback play of the entire season outside of a Jags-Jets game, which will never happen. So we're in a spot as a league where these are just inevitable. You signed up for this when you opted in to play for the season, and I would be upset if I'm a Broncos fan, but I'm not going to be upset at the league. You shouldn't be upset at the league because they're trying to do the best of what they can. You should be upset at Jeff Driscoll, Blake Bortles, Drew Lock, and Brett Rippon for the way they handled the situation and the way they were not diligent wearing masks and being responsible, which is what all we're asking for all of our players in this day and age.
Yeah, definitely. But, terrible game played by the Broncos, and that's just what happens during the season. No breaks for anyone except for Lamar Jackson because, poster boy for the NFL. But moving on, we have some sad news for Texans fans and some fantasy players. Will Fuller has been suspended by the league for 6 games, and he will be out for the remainder of this season and 1 game for next season. So that's just terrible news for, Deshaun Watson, all Texans fans. But this is the end of his contract this season. So this is probably most likely his last game played in Houston unless he does get a contract. He was on this is a career year for him so far. Touchdowns in 6 straight games. We saw what he did on Thanksgiving, but maybe you can just throw that up to the juice that he was taking. But talking about the Texans, no one's going to talk about Deshaun Watson this year, but he's been playing great all year long. And despite what the record is for the Texans going forward, I believe they have their franchise guy. They just signed an extension over the offseason. If they can get a new head coach, maybe Eric Bieniemy or a Joe Brady, someone, or Greg Roman from the Ravens, they get someone like that in Houston. Definitely, bright future ahead for that team.
Now, something I want to bring up that I was just thinking about earlier was we saw that trade speculation between, Will Fuller and like the Packers and teams like that. And you have to wonder if there was news about this potentially happening with Will Fuller earlier in the season, because it seemed like all the directions were pointing towards Will Fuller getting traded and a team like the Packers being the trade suitor. And that was when you had Bill O'Brien as the current GM, who knew of his mistakes with receivers and needed to make back some draft capital. And then you were in a situation where there's going to be teams who feel like they need those outside threats. And you would have gotten positive value for a guy who's on an expiring contract anyway. So it makes you wonder if the league knew about something like this happening, where teams like the Packers had some inside information, and because it was the Packers who turned down the Texans trade offer. It wasn't the Texans turning down some sorry offer from the Packers. It was the Packers saying, no, we do not want Will Fuller. So I'm wondering if there was a situation in the league where this information, which it's not going to hit the headlines until it does. And when it does, it's just a shock to everyone. But this stuff probably goes around. He probably knew stuff was happening, and the league had to take in the sample and analyze it and stuff like that. So I'm just wondering if that stuff happens more in the NFL, and we don't get news about it. But that's some of the interesting thoughts I've had on the situation. What do you think about that? Am I crazy?
I think you might be a little crazy on it. I don't know how long it takes to get one of those drug tests done, but if he was definitely juicing before, I think they definitely would have called him out on it a long time before that. And I don't think anyone from the Texans organization want any of that information to get out to, a team like the Packers or anyone else who might be trade suitors for Will Fuller. But, that could be an interesting thing behind the scenes in the NFL that we don't know about. But, who knows?
I don't know. I thought it was interesting. But speaking of the Texans, AFC team in the playoffs last year, not this year though, but the AFC playoff picture is starting to shape up, as we should say. Certain teams on the rise, like the Cleveland Browns, Tennessee Titans, among the mix, and certain teams that we thought were shoo-ins and had easy schedules, kind of shooting themselves in the foot here. I mean, well, let's first talk about the Raiders, who you're going to a game at Atlanta, and a game that you should have been favored. The offense has been playing amazing. This is a bad Falcons defense. And then you just lay an absolute egg. I know there's an any given Sunday mantra, but 43-8, you got to be kidding. That's the worst loss John Gruden's ever had in his career. And the worst loss this Raiders franchise, who has not been good the past 20 years, has had in over 17 years. Laraib, what happened?
Derek Carr just came out flat in that game. I didn't know what I was watching there. He had 2, maybe 3 terrible fumbles, a pick 6. I mean, the offense just looked flat out there, even with Josh Jacobs. They just couldn't get anything going against the Falcons. This is what the Falcons have been doing all season long, right? They play a terrible game, and then the next week they just come out and they demolish the Vikings. Then they play another terrible game, and they come out and they demolish the Raiders. So I think this has more to do with the Raiders, just coming out flat on offense, and for the Falcons, that 1 or 2 games that they'll just play outstanding in for absolute no reason at all. But, this is a terrible loss for the Raiders. This was a must-win game for them, because now they're sitting at the 9th seed, and, they might not be able to get that back in the playoffs.
Interesting to note, I just want to bring up real quick. The Atlanta Falcons have a point differential of plus 17 on the season, which is the same as the Buffalo Bills, who are 8-3. So is that talking about how inconsistent the Falcons are? I don't know what other stat I can pull up for you. But other teams to note, the Dolphins had a bad loss. They beat the Jets, but you should beat the Jets. So they're kind of finding their way back. Big win for the Browns. I mean, it was over the Jags, but you got to win those games. It was a tough one, but they pulled it out, sitting in 8-3, and you still have games remaining at the Giants, at the Jets. So the AFC playoff picture, it seemed like the Browns were on their way out, Raiders on their way in. Now it's starting to look like that's not the case. And if the Ravens lose this week, they'll have 5 losses. And if they can't go undefeated the rest of the season, I don't know if 10-6 can get you into the playoffs. So the Ravens, a team that we almost had a shoe-in for the playoffs 2 weeks ago. Now we're in, jeopardy here. So, I mean, the AFC in general has been wild this entire season. How it looks right now, my bet is I think the Ravens get their way back in. I think the Dolphins fall out. I think the Browns get in.
Yeah, I mean, I saw the Browns play this past weekend, and they did not look good at all. I mean, Baker Mayfield has less passing yards than Dak Prescott still, and Dak Prescott hasn't played since week 5. I know that Browns offense is run heavy, but there's going to be a point in the season for the Cleveland Browns or a point in the playoffs. They're going to be down, and they're going to need Baker Mayfield to throw his way back into the game, and he's just not going to be able to do it. Their schedule going forward is going to be a little bit tough. But, right now with the game ahead on the Dolphins and the Colts, I think they're definitely going to make the playoffs. But they're, they're not going to win a playoff game. And then for the Dolphins, they struggled a lot against the Jets team, which they should have beaten very easily. That was a tight game for most of it. And for the Ravens, I think if they lose this game when they lose this game against the Steelers, they're going to be 2 games out from the Indianapolis Colts at the 7th seed. So it's going to be very hard for them to sneak in. But I think the Dolphins, if they fall out, I think the Ravens will be able to make it.
Yeah, absolutely. So now we're going to move on. After that, we'll get more into playoff predictions, things as the playoffs start to come around and these things really start to heat up. But we're getting to that point of the season where you can almost memorize most of the team's remaining schedules, as there's only 4 or 5 games left for every NFL team. But a division that we've been, really crapping on the entire season for all the right reasons, the NFC least has a new current champion. After the Eagles lost on Monday night, the New York Football Giants are now in the lead due to a tiebreaker over the Washington Football Team. But both the football team and the Giants are 4-7, Cowboys 3-8, and the Philadelphia Eagles 3-7-1. Laraib, what do I make of this?
I mean, if you look at any one of these teams' schedules going forward, they are not easy whatsoever. And I think, though, whoever comes out of this division is most likely going to have 6 wins at the most, if I'm being honest. 6 wins at the most. But we saw the Eagles play last night, and that defense is for real. The only reason this Eagles team has 3 wins and a tie is because of how great that defense is. And then, I talked about it earlier on in the season when we saw Carson Wentz struggling, and I said, Jalen Hurts, he's going to get a start this season. And then, there's rumors about him going against the Seahawks earlier on. We only saw him go in for maybe 2 or 3 snaps. But going forward, I expect to see a lot more Jalen Hurts, especially with just how terrible Carson Wentz played.
Yeah, I mean, when I look at the current champs, the New York Football Giants with a big win this Sunday, although, it wasn't against a great opponent by any means, but they got the job done. But they're in a situation where Daniel Jones went down in that game, and that is a concern for Giants fans, as the remaining schedule for the Giants is nothing to sneeze at. You have the Seahawks coming up next week, and let me see real quick. Yeah, so you have the Seahawks, the Cardinals, Browns, Ravens, and Cowboys. And for all intents and purposes, even if you had Daniel Jones, you probably only beat the Cowboys, maybe the Browns at home, maybe. But you're in a situation in which, the football team, you beat twice. So you have that game lead on them no matter what. But Washington has winnable games against the Panthers and the Eagles remaining on their schedule. And you know what the most interesting thing about this division is? The Washington Football Team has a point differential on the season of -2, almost breaking even. So they're closer to a team that should be about 5-5, 5-6 right now than a team that's 4-7. So my bet right now, probably the wild card bet, I think the football team can win this division, Laraib. I think in terms of a front 7, they have one of the best in the division. Now, the Eagles' defense has impressed me the past few weeks, and same with the Giants, who have come on strong. The Cowboys, we can both agree, are out of it, right? Unless something remarkable happened.
It's gonna be tough for them to get back in.
Yeah, I mean, we're already with 8 losses, and that you get swept by the football team this season. So you're 2 games behind them with a harder schedule going forward. It's going to be a very, very tall task to get back into this thing. So if I was a betting man, which I might be pretty soon if these funds don't come in, then I would put money on the football team. Laraib, what say you?
I think it's going to come down to, the New York Giants. Their 2 wins over the football team. And I think, even with Danny Dimes out, if they can squeak a win by without him, and then when he comes back, they play the Eagles on week 17. So I think that's going to be a win for them. So I think I'm going with the New York football team. We want to put a cane sauce on it.
Well, the current cane sauce is between the Eagles.
We have to put that one in the back pocket for now.
But you know what, Laraib? I will take you up on your offer. I think the Washington football team will beat the Carolina Panthers and then beat the Philadelphia Eagles to be a game up on the Giants. And at 6-10, the champion of the NFC East will be the Washington football team.
And I think at 6-10, the New York Giants, after beating the Cardinals, after Daniel Dimes comes back, and beating the Cowboys on week 17, will hold the tiebreaker in the NFC East.
All right, interesting. So now we're going to move on to talk about the NFC. We're not going to talk about any of these teams in a realistic playoff picture besides the division champion. But let's talk about this NFC playoff picture for a bit. We thought we knew the 7 teams, right? Or the 6 teams minus whoever came out of the dungeon of the NFC East. But we're getting into a situation now. The Cardinals have lost 2 in a row. Tampa's lost 3 out of 4 and is kind of spiraling. But then you have teams like the Vikings. If only they would have beaten the Cowboys. If only. They would be sitting at 6-5 right now, Laraib, and tied with the Arizona Cardinals. But they are now – what are they at right now? The Minnesota – are they 5-6?
They're 5-6, yeah.
So Vikings at 5-6, 49ers at 5-6. These 2 teams.
The Bears at 5-6 as well, Lewis.
Are you joking me?
I mean, there's a reality out there when Mitchell Trubisky turns in to the guy who the Chicago Bears drafted him to be, and he wins that. He brings them to the playoffs. But if we're talking realistically, Tampa Bay, their schedule is way too easy for them to miss the playoffs. For the Rams, they're 2 games ahead of – no, excuse me, they're only 1 game ahead of the Cardinals at this point. But I think, I trust them a lot more than I do than the Cardinals. So I think the only team I can see falling out of this is maybe the Cardinals. And I could, if 49ers can keep on playing how they're playing, they played a great game. Even without – that team is still greatly coached by Kyle Shanahan. And even without the quarterback, Jimmy Garoppolo, he was not the focal point of the team last year whenever they won the NFC, right? It was getting the ball into your playmakers. You saw what Deebo Samuel did over this weekend, right? He ran all over that Rams team, and then Raheem Mostert comes back. So, they have a, nice shot of making that 7th seed even without Jimmy Garoppolo.
So we're in a situation with the Cardinals where the remaining schedule is Rams twice, 49ers, Giants, who you predicted would beat this Cardinals team, and an Eagles matchup, which they should win. But we kind of saw in that Patriots game, there's a recipe for this, Arizona offense to really muddy it up. I mean, you got to have a good corner to match up against D-Hop, but you're going to have Jalen Ramsey in 2 weeks. 49ers, Sherman is going to be back for that game. And then Eagles, Darius Slay, even though he got slayed by DK. And then the Giants have 2 really good corners in Bradbury and Logan Ryan. Logan Ryan, exactly. So it's not going to be easy cornerback matchups going forward for DeAndre Hopkins. So you get that matchup on him, and then you kind of do this mush rush at the defensive line, not exactly blitzing gaps, creating holes for Kyler Murray to escape. You kind of just stay there, don't really go at him, get him uncomfortable, which the Patriots are so good at doing, and make Kyler Murray beat you from that 10 to 15-yard intermediate range which he really does not like that much. He's either dumping it off or he's trying to let it, fly to a Christian Kirk or a DeAndre Hopkins. So you're in a situation, if you're the Cardinals, where you need to get better at this precision passing game, or realistically down the stretch, if you drop both to the Rams, lose to the Giants, you'll be sitting at 8-8. And 8-8 is not a playoff team in the NFC, in my opinion. And for the 49ers, they've gotten through the heart of their schedule. We talked about the gauntlet they went through. They won some, they lost some. Injuries all spread around. But like you were talking about, they're getting healthier as the season's going on. George Kittle will return this season. Now, it's going to be late. It's going to be around week 15. But that's when you play against the Cardinals again. So things are looking up for this 49ers team to potentially get in. And as a Saints fan, as for the Vikings, I don't want to be in a situation where we're the 2 seed, Vikings get at the 7 seed. That would ruin my entire day hearing that is going to be the matchup and I have to potentially live through another devastating Vikings playoff game.
Well, let me ask you something here, Lewis. Out of the Minnesota Vikings, the Chicago Bears, and 49ers, all at 5 and 6, who do you think has the best chance of taking that 7 seed?
I feel like the best chance you got to give it to the 49ers. The Vikings still have really tough games left on the schedule. They have to play at Tampa, they host Tampa. They play at New Orleans this season, and those are very losable games for them. Those are games they are not going to be favored in. So you're going to be sitting at 8 losses for there. And then the remaining of your schedule is not too bad. You have Jacksonville coming up this week, and then you have games remaining against the Bears and the Lions, which shouldn't be too difficult. So you're in a situation, if you're the Vikings, can you beat the Bucks or the Saints? If you can beat either of those teams, 9-7 is going to beat out the Cardinals. 9-7 could beat out the 49ers. 49ers still play the Seahawks, still play the Rams again, still play the Cardinals again. So out of those teams, I've said the most likely, probably I'm changing my pick. I think the Vikings are the most likely out of those teams remaining.
One team we're forgetting about is the Chicago Bears. Now they've lost 5 games in a row. Okay, but that was we talked about it early on in the season. That was a rough stretch that they had. They played the Rams, Saints, Titans, Vikings, and Packers. Right, all games that they probably weren't projected to win. But coming up, you have the Lions, Texans, Vikings, Jaguars, Packers. Right, so if you can win, you beat the Lions, Texans, and the Vikings, and then the Jaguars. And if you can win one against the Vikings or the Packers, you can go 9-7 and you can sneak into the playoffs, at the 7th seed.
Oh my goodness. This is getting crazier than I initially thought. They have the easiest schedule by far. And if they beat the Vikings, which is a winnable game, they didn't exactly get blown out the first matchup. This defense is still good. Maybe Mitch can – I don't know with Mitch, but I've been so let down by this Bears team recently. You mentioned their schedule is tough, but this is a team that if they made the playoffs, I would be very happy to play against them. Bring on the Bears if you're asking me. Now, in terms of which team is the best right now out of those 3 teams, I would probably say the 49ers just because of the coaching and getting guys back. There can be they're not getting Nick Bosa or Solomon Thomas back, but getting Sherman back. Is Garoppolo on pace to come back anytime soon?
I think Garoppolo will come back before the season ends.
Okay, so getting him, Kittle, we got Mostert back. This is an exciting time for 49ers fans.
The last thing I want to see as a Seahawks fan is San Francisco 49ers team who is at, they're at 8-7, and it's week 17. They're playing the Seahawks, and they need to beat us to get into the playoffs. I don't want to see the 49ers team with Jimmy Garoppolo and George Kittle healthy. So I'm rooting for these 49ers teams to lose going down the stretch just so I don't have a week 17 heartbreak just like last year.
And no shot for Panthers or Lions fans. Are we cutting them off?
Yeah, Lions. Maybe they have. They just fired their head coach and their GM. Maybe they can turn things around, finish the season at 9-7. but I highly doubt it. I mean, looking at their schedule going forward, you still have to play – you play the Bears and the Packers and the Titans, then the Buccaneers. So it's not going to be any – they probably have the toughest schedule out of all the remaining – not all the remaining teams, but, out of most of them. And I don't think there's any way that they make the playoffs.
Absolutely. So now, Laraib, we're going to transition for the last segment. We'll go into some ending, closing remarks afterwards. But, we saw huge games from his two wide receivers this weekend, which made me think, who are the top 5 wide receivers in the NFL? We both have our lists, so we're both going to go through them, starting from number 5 and move our way up to number 1. So, Laraib, you go first. Who is your number 5 receiver in the NFL?
My number 5 receiver in the NFL is Julio Jones. I mean, we see him struggle sometimes. He's been dealing with injury this season. But by hook or by crook, it's going to become, it's going to come playoff time, and the season's going to be over. And we're going to be looking at, the top 3 wide receivers in the NFL with the most receiving yards. And Julio Jones is going to be up there some way, somehow. I mean, he does it every single year. Almost every single game he's being double covered by defense. You have to game plan for this guy specifically. Any week he can just go up and moss you on any cornerback, and that's why I have him at the number 5 spot.
So at the number 5 spot, I have one DK Metcalf. Now, I kind of made my list around if I'm a cornerback and I'm lining up against these guys, who one-on-one am I the most terrified to go up against? And DK Metcalf has to be a top 5 wide receiver in my opinion. Now, in terms of a receiver skill set, he's probably closer to the bottom of the top 10. But what made me put him here is the connection he has with Russell Wilson. And we're not taking these receivers, just in a vacuum, put them up against each other, because that's not fair. You have to look at the situation. And DK Metcalf's in a situation for him to prosper and thrive. And just the moon balls from Russell Wilson, letting DK become that athlete, become that stud that he is, and a 245-pound, 4.33 DK Metcalf running down the field. Who wants to go up against that? I mean, 204-pound Darius Slay had no part of that yesterday, and dude's an absolute truck, so that's why he's my number 5 wide receiver.
At the number 4 spot, great fantasy performance by him this week, probably won a lot of people their weeks. It has to go to Tyreek Hill. I mean, if there's one guy that you do not want to play man-to-man defense against, it's Tyreek Hill. I mean, we saw what he did to Carlton Davis. We've seen what he gives defensive corners headaches. You always have to have a guy, single high safety, double high safety, making sure that this guy does not just absolutely fly past you on the field. And, with Patrick Mahomes, who has an absolute cannon, we can launch it 75 yards down the field. Give me Tyreek Hill at the number 4.
So at my number 4 spot, much to my fellow Saints fans' chagrin, I have Michael Thomas. And my reasoning here is, first off, the gap between 1 and 4 is not that big, in my opinion. You could interchange most of these guys. Number 1, there's a bit of a gap, but we'll get to that in a second. But I'm a big proponent of what have you done for me lately. And I know Michael Thomas has been injured for most of this season, and now he's playing games without Drew Brees as quarterback. So there's only been 2 games all season. The first one he got injured in when he's played with Drew Brees. And in the second game he played with Drew Brees got injured in that game. Or no, it was the Buccaneers game. So, and we saw what happened in that game. But this is why I have these 3 guys above him, because of the what have you done for me lately factor. But I just want to remind NFL fans, 149 receptions. And if I'm a cornerback going up against Michael Thomas, probably the best route runner in the NFL, and you like to say, he can't beat you deep, he can't do this and that. Well, it's because his quarterback can't beat you deep. Michael Thomas is a fast 4.5, and his route running and ability to read a cornerback and how strong he is to get you off of him, move off him, and just a constant stick mover. He is the number 4 cornerback, 149 receptions last season. And don't be surprised when Drew Brees comes back, Michael Thomas starts having 150-yard receiving games with 12 receptions, and it's like, whoa, well, this offense is 10 times better.
Yeah, for my number 3 spot, I have Michael Thomas, for the exact reasons that you said. And, he probably has the best hands in the NFL. I mean, 13-inch hands that, stretch all the way across. He doesn't drop very many balls. And I would say he's probably the second best route runner, but I have one guy ahead of him. But no, he runs clean routes. Maybe he can't beat you down the field, but his precision with his routes, he knows exactly how to beat any type of defense that you put up against him. Possession receiver, but he can still, go up and get it sometimes. And, he gets a yard after catch. He can run a little bit too. So that's why Michael Thomas at my number 3 spot.
And my number 3 spot is one Davante Adams, who has been absolutely torching cornerbacks all season. He's missed a few games here and there, but he's probably been the most consistent wide receiver week to week. And the connection he has with Aaron Rodgers is probably the best wide receiver quarterback connection in the entire NFL when both of them are operating at 100% in terms of their health. And just seeing this week after week after week, no one in the league can cover Davante Adams one-on-one. You have to help out on him. And when him and Aaron Rodgers are clicking all cylinders, it's just a mismatch. He can go over you. He can sit down, yard after catch. He's very similar to Michael Thomas. I don't think he's the same in terms of, beating a cornerback in any situation. But I will say because of his quarterback, he's going to get more of those 20, 25-yard receptions and turn those into big gains on his own. And that's why I have him as my number 3.
Yeah, and then also I have him at my number 2. Being an absolute route technician. He can run any route in the playbook. He can beat you in in many different ways, just like you were saying. Aaron Rodgers, number 1 target. And any play, if Aaron Rodgers can get you offsides, he's looking to go on that deep bomb to Davante Adams almost every single time. So give me Davante Adams at the number 2 spot.
And in my number 2 spot, I have the Tyreek Hill. If I'm a cornerback, right, and I have to guard Tyreek Hill, that is the worst decision to go 1-0. He's probably the biggest mismatch in the NFL, even topping my number 1 spot. But I have him number 1 for different reasons. Tyreek Hill, 4.24 speed. Don't tell me he's any slower than that because I see game speed, and he's charted almost record-breaking numbers every single week. And we saw the absolute prime of the Mahomes-Tyreek Hill connection and what they can accomplish if they just, if you put no safety help on Tyreek Hill, and it is an absolute nightmare. There's certain cornerbacks you can put on receivers to really stunt them. You can put a Jalen Ramsey on, let's say, like a DeAndre Hopkins, and he'll have a tough day. You can put a Stephon Gilmore on a DK Metcalf, you can put a Stephon Gilmore on DeAndre Hopkins, and you can put a Jalen Ramsey on a DK Metcalf, and they're going to have tough games. There is no cornerback in the NFL who can guard Tyreek Hill one-on-one. None. And his breakaway speed and how Mahomes can put the ball on the money most of the time, he is the biggest weapon any offense can have when you have a howitzer like Patrick Mahomes delivering him the ball.
Yeah, that's for sure. But I think you and I can both agree on the number 1 wide receiver in the NFL this year. It has to be DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, throughout his whole career, early on with the Texans, he didn't have, franchise quarterbacks to play with. But we saw the past couple of years with Deshaun Watson, he went absolute crazy. And then this year with Kyler Murray, if there's one guy and you need the Hail Mary, you need someone to go up and just make a catch, you got to give it to DeAndre Hopkins.
I mean, there's not much to add there. DeAndre Hopkins is my number 1 receiver. Not only is he, great in possession situations in terms of just getting to that first down marker and, getting you a first down, but we saw Hail Marys, he'll do it for you. He is my contention for the best hands in the NFL. Massive hands, just can bring a ball in from any situation. We've seen what he's done his entire career, so it's no surprise he is the number 1 receiver. Shout out, I want to say real quick, honorable mentions. Stephon Diggs has been playing very well this season. Adam Thielen has been playing very well. Any other guys I'm not thinking
AJ
about?
Brown, right? I know he's been injured for middle of the season, but he's came back and he's reshaped that Titans offense.
Yeah, Terry McLaurin, Allen Robinson are a few guys that are on the top of my mind. But no, all these receivers are great. This is probably one of the best receiving seasons we've had in a while. Even, past some of the guys, like you mentioned Julio, but past the Julio, AB, Megatron, Larry Fitzgerald days that we grew up with. Now we're seeing all these new young receivers blossoming into their own right, and it's going to be a great time for fantasy owners in these next few years, always having great wide receivers in their lineups. So that will conclude most of the episode. There is no Thursday night game this week as it was Ravens-Cowboys, but that now is going to be pushed to next Tuesday. So nothing else to talk about in this episode. We will go over that game in our predictions episode this week, which will be dropping on Friday. But Laraib, anything else you want to touch on?
No, I think we're all good.
All right, so that'll wrap it up for this episode. Links to our Twitter and Instagram will be in the bio below, where we'll keep you updated on every post we have. That will sign us off. Y'all have a safe winter break, and we will catch you on Friday.
All right, see y'all.